Hi everyone, in this tutorial we are going to go through a little bit more about the particles and how to work with the templates. So open Snap Lens or Lens Studio and go to the templates and then find the particles template. So mine is here, yours might be down here. You can also search up here for templates. So if you write particles example, oh wait. That was a recent project. So recent templates particles, and click on it to open it and it will automatically load. So you can see in the template, it gives you a bunch of different sample projects. And in the left-hand project panel here, we have different things. So currently, the one that we are viewing is rain. If I uncheck that and put snow, there is snow. If I do blizzard, I can do blizzard, snow, and rain. So there's all of them. So it's a really snowy, rainy day, or I can just do blizzard. Bokeh is the lens flare, and sparkles. So these are the simple particles. They've labeled as the simple particles. And then custom particles, particles on tap, which is actually hard to preview because we don't have the tap. But here's a smoke example, fountain embers, and so on. And now I can look at the details of the particle. So here they have a few different folders. So there's different scripts that they have that are controllers. So if you look at the, let's look at the rain. This rain has a rain controller, so I can add rain intensity and lower that so it's really rainy or not. And these are all scripts that they've added to different kinds of particles that gives you extra control for those specific particles. We've already used the particle trigger controller, and yeah, that's the only one we used. So that's what's in the scripts folder. In the particles resources, we have the meshes, which is just something that automatically comes with every particle. And then the textures for the different particles. So we can see here, if we go back to smoke, there is a texture in the particle material. So down here is the smoke material. And we can see here that they have a texture called FX Smoke Realistic Small. And those are all located in the texture folder. And we have that file here, FX, where is it? FX Smoke Realistic Small is there. So those are the images that make up the smoke texture. And the scene resources are the things that are going to be outside of the particle. So we have a plane mesh, which is automatically generated when we add a plane. And these are automatically rendered when we have when we add particles. And then the materials, particle materials, and these are the things that we're really going to look at to be editing. So I have the smoke particle that I want to look at. So I click on this material, and you can see here they say edit me. And there's different kinds of things here that give you indication of what are the things that you can use to edit in your own projects. So they have these settings here that give us all of the things that make up the way this smoke behaves. And we'll go through this so that you understand what the kind of different aspects are that make up the smoke. So we have, the particle count will add in more smoke particles or less. We have the lifetime, the duration of the lifetime of the smoke particles. So the minimum is 2 and the maximum is 4. If I lower that, it's going to spend, it's going to give me less time between the, so I have them at the same. So these are all at the same. Now you can see when I switch it back to 4, you get a kind of variance in the size because it's spawning and going away within either 2 seconds or 4 seconds. So I get more variation when I give it a lifetime minimum and maximum. And as we go through here, there are certain things that are important for how this smoke particle works. We have our base texture. And if we look at the particle resources and the texture, and we look at that base texture, preview, they have a file. So it's this image over and over again that's repeating. And it has a transparency, it's a PNG, so they've already prepared this asset to have a transparency to it. And it is repeating that image over and over again. So that's what is creating that really smoke-like look, is that the image is already looks like smoke. If I replace that with something else, for example, if I replace that with another texture, let's see. Let's use their number test. And I put that in here. It's going to change it to those numbers, which is an image that they have for testing Sprite Sheets, which we'll look at in a bit. But I'm going to take that back. So you can really tell that, you know, when I change this, it no longer looks like smoke at all. And so the smoke is really, that smoke look is really coming from this PNG image that they've already created in Photoshop. So then if we go through here a little bit more, we can see that they've added some things. There's a smoke edge fade. If we take that out, it changes the appearance. So that's good. So let's put that back on. Which is under the color ramp texture. And we have a dissolve speed. So the alpha is dissolving. So it's also becoming more transparent. So I can increase this and you can see it's dissipating a lot quicker. So it's adding in a higher level of dissolved transparency. If I take it away totally, it still has that transparent. You can see the edges are still transparent. It still looks like smoke, and that's because of that original image. So the dissolve is how much it's dissipating. And you don't really need to, I mean, you can just check through and see what happens when you change some of the settings that they already have. Some of the settings, like the noise, it does something, but it doesn't do that much. So you don't always need to have the exact same settings here to have it look still realistic like smoke. And here we have the rotation, and the rate is minimum and maximum. So it's kind of rotating a little bit there. And if we look down here, we have a scale, which is random. We have a minimum and a max, and for the start size, and then for the end size. So this is also adding in random size. And then this is something we haven't looked at yet, is the gravity force. So this gravity is in centimeters per second, and it's how much, it's just what it sounds like. Gravity is pulling on the smoke. So if I decrease that, smoke is going to go a lot faster. So I'll put that down to 3. Or let's say 1. bring it up, back up to 10. So it's how much it's pulling it down. Actually, it's not changing the speed. Sorry. It's changing. That's the velocity. The velocity is changing the speed. I could change this maximum here down to the minimum down, the maximum down. It'll start changing the speed of the smoke. But the gravity, so it's changing how much it is being pulled. So as I increase the number, so if I do 20, it's letting it go more. And that's because the gravity pull is a negative. So if I make it -10, it's going to pull it a lot closer to the ground. So the smoke is having more effect of gravity on it. Normal gravity is, I think it's -9.8 meters per second. This is centimeters per second. So I could really, if I do 100, that's really pulling it down. That doesn't look very good though. So let's see, -20. It's a really heavy smoke. Maybe I would do that for something if I wanted it to look more like dry ice. And if I wanted it to be, let's see what it does. Yeah, 100, that's smoke is really going up into the air. Maybe that's like a campfire type of smoke. I would increase the gravity force, which means I am actually decreasing the amount of gravity and letting it fly in the air more. So with gravity, it works with a negative. So the negative, the more negative number, the more it's going to pull it down to the ground. So that's how that works. And you can go through and do that with all of these and look at their specific settings. So I'm not sure. So here it is, embers. So there's the embers, and I can look at the embers and see what all the settings are that are creating those embers. If I had a campfire, I would move the embers around the fire and I would make that smoke go up higher, how I had it a minute ago. And so this is really helpful because it gives you a lot of ideas and also gives you the settings for things, for how certain things can be set to look a certain way, and it gives you these scripts. And I could now start creating my project within this space using this as a beginning space, but I'm going to be doing a lot of different things in my lens. So I don't want to use their template here because it also has all this stuff in here that's clogging up my project, and I don't want that. But what I am going to do is save this as a project on my desktop. So I'm going to use this as particle examples and save that. And now I'm going to go and do a new project. Okay, so I have a new project that I'm starting from the beginning, and I'm going to be doing different things, but one of the things that I want to add in my project are some interesting particles. So if I want to add particles from the menu here, like last time, we would go down, open the drop down and go down to particles. And so this is going to automatically give us a scene object. I'm going to rename this as my particles 1. And then you can see automatically within that, it gives us a particle mesh and a particles emitter material. So here's my particles, and I'm going to rename my particles emitter material to my particles 1. And now I can change my particles and do whatever I want to those particles. So I can change the texture. Let's bring in an image. Yeah, from files. Let me find a PNG to bring in. I think I had, let's get those glasses. I know I have one that's called glasses. Yeah, from a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so I just have these glasses from my other example, and I can go to my particles and change that particle texture to the glasses and change the amount and make it less actually. I'll change the velocity. And the start size, I'll have it scaled at 3 and 3, and start the end at 6 and 6. And then I will, let's add in some gravity. So I'll do minus 10. And now that is going downwards. And I want to change the spread of this. So it's all kind of spawning from the single point. But if I want to make this a larger sort of space that this is in, I would change the spawn points. So there's a box that I can use that's kind of a box, if you think of it as a box that the particles are in. And right now it's sized, the scale is all 1. I can change that to 10. That's the X and the Y and the Z. And so now it's spreading out the space of my particle system so that it's not combined as much. I can also do the sphere. Maybe I'll do this as 20 and 20 and 20, so that it doesn't anymore look like, it's all centered out of a single point. And if we look at this on the side view here, so you can see there is now this sort of 3-dimensional cloud space. If I take away this box spawn and the sphere, well, it's hard to see because of the size that I did, but I could do initial location. Oh, I know, it's rotating. So let's get the rotation off so you can see it better. So I have this rotation that is rotating. I don't want it to rotate at all. So I'm going to take away the rotation. And it should now be flat when I look at it. Let's see the scale. Okay, I'm going to show you what happens when we change this. Okay, so it doesn't look as flat as I wanted to show you how it looks, but let me show you. So I can align this to the X axis, and now all of the particles are turned along the X axis. I can align it to the Y axis, and now all the particles, here we go, now it looks flat. all the particles are aligned only to that y-axis. Let me do the x again. So now you can see here, all of the glasses are on this flat plane and aligned to the x-axis, or I can do the z-axis. And now when I go this way, it is aligned along that axis. Oh, I had those two. There it is, aligned along the z-axis, which is the depth axis. So I'm not going to have it aligned to an axis, and instead I'm going to keep it as, I'm going to put it into that box spawn, and now when I zoom out, you can see that it's just randomly generating within this kind of invisible box shape. So that's how I'm really kind of spreading that out. So let's look at this sphere. I make this box bigger too, 20. And 20. It's going to make that even wider and spread out. So this is how the rain and the snow is laid out. It's not spawning from this particular point. It's spawning with inside this entire sort of three-dimensional box space or sphere space. So that's how I spread that out. But okay, so that's things that we can do to edit our particle system using the things that already come along with it. But now I want to use some of the things from the template. So I'm going to find where I saved that. So here it is, particles examples. And I'm just going to pull in the particular files that I want from their example for my project. So if you go into the particles examples that you saved and click on public, there are different folders here, and those are the folders that were down here. And we have the particle materials, and one of them that we used was smoke. So if I go into smoke, I can take that and just drag it into my resources panel here. So it's giving me a folder called textures and then that smoke material. And right now I have this particle system that I created as my particles, but I'm going to take the smoke material and add it to my particle system here. So I can use that. If I go into, so it's also automatically dragged in the texture that is required for that. So here, if we click on the smoke and we look in the particle material settings for the smoke, we can see this, that FX smoke realistic small. So that automatically pulled this in when I dragged that material into this panel. And then there's the color ramp smoke fade texture there. So those things automatically pulled in. So that's great for me. And now I can do all kinds of things and change the settings if I want to. So I can make this very colorful smoke, change the colors, make it really dirty looking industrial smoke, etc. I can also do different things. So for example, I can change the gravity. I can change any of the settings that I want to here. And we can see specifically, so here's our base texture. And one of the things that is good to look at is the way that this alpha is working. So I just changed the color on the alpha, but here the alpha is starting at 1, which means it's 100% opacity. So it's not fading. It's not faded at all. And then it's adding an alpha dissolve, and it's dissolving at 0.2 is the dissolve speed. So if I take that away, you can see it's a lot thicker. Where did it just go? Alpha dissolve, alpha start, alpha random, alpha dissolve speed. Not random, alpha dissolving. Let me shrink down the size of this so you can see it a bit better. If I go up here, it's easier. I can just scale it down a bit. And I am going to move it over here like this. Put it back in space. Okay, so now when I go back there and I go to that alpha dissolve, and change it, as I increase it, it's going to dissolve more quickly. So if I decrease it and take it away, it's not going to, oops, that's the shadow size. It's decrease it and take it away. It's not going to have that dissolve. Now that's negative, so that doesn't look good. So I'm adding in this dissolve here. And yeah, so okay, so that's a lot that you can do right there with the smoke texture. The smoke particle, let's look at the way a couple of the other filters work. So another one that is interesting to work with is the particle Flipbook. And what that is going to do, so let's drag this into this space here. And I'm going to create a new particle, and I'm going to rename it Flipbook Drops. And here I already have this automatically here, but I'm going to take this Flipbook and put it into my particle emitter. And I'll turn off the smoke for now. Okay, so you see these numbers that are changing on the screen. And what this does is it creates a series of particles that are changing over time according to a sprite sheet. And the sprite sheet that is in here is the number test one to show you how that works. I'm going to scale this down a bit so that we can see a bit more in the frame. Okay, so if I go back here to my particle Flipbook, which is now added to my Flipbook drops, you can see that there is a setting here called Flipbook, and that was not checked in our smoke example. And if I uncheck it, it's just going to give us that whole image. So if I look at that texture, A sprite sheet is similar to the frames of a GIF. So in the particle resources is where the textures are. And if I open this up, each of these are like the frames of a GIF image. And you can create your own sprite sheet by putting each of the frames of a GIF on a sheet in rows and in columns. And so they have a lot of their examples are these sprite sheet examples where the image is going to change across these. So it's another way to kind of do an animated part of your filter that is not going to be just the same thing. The smoke, on the other hand, it worked really well by just repeating the same image over and over again and using the settings to kind of change it. So that looked like animated smoke. But something else might require different sort of shapes and movements. So something like a bubble is going to not be static, but have little like blobby movements in between frames so that it looks like a bubble that is kind of, I guess this is like a bubble, water bubble that's sort of moving in between different things. So this is what we would use the Flipbook setting for. So if we go to this Flipbook here, it says number of columns and rows. So in the example of the number one, we have 4 columns and 4 rows with a total possible frames of 16. So here is where we put that. We put 4 and 4 and a number of valid frames, which is the number of frames that are possible within that exist in the sheet, are 16. So I could have this up to 15 and have 16 blank if my GIF image that I created a sprite sheet of didn't have a final frame here. And I would put my valid frame at 15. So it never gives me that blank one. And here I can change the Flipbook speed. So each of these particles is its own Flipbook. So when I change the speed and make it slower, it's going 1, 2, 3 here. I'm going to move this down. Give us more time to look at it. Okay. So this is changing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And as I increase the Flipbook speed, the numbers change faster or slower. And that's the speed of each of these. It's all changing at the same speed, but they're spawning at different moments. So it's not always at the same number. So I can change this number test image to any image that it has a layout of rows and columns. So I'm going to use this bubble from their example, but I have to first bring it into my project and pull it in there. So I had that in the examples folder that I downloaded. I went into public, particle resources, textures, and then I dragged in the bubbles here. So now it's here, and I want to put it here. So I'm going to drag it over here. Okay, so now you can see we have these black squares with the bubble changing, but it doesn't fit properly. And that's because we don't have the correct numbers and rows. So there's 2 columns and 2 rows, and the number of valid frames is 4. So now we have the bubble changing. I'll put the speed up within the frame, but we have this black square behind it, and that's because the PNG, it's on a PNG with a transparent background. I could make that a transparent background, but I can also change the blend mode up here and do screen, for example. So I don't have that. I just have these little bubbles floating, and they're little animated bubbles with only those 4 frames. And you can kind of see those frames really well. But if I make this a bit smaller, oops, if I move this back a bit, and I made this smaller in scale, that's too small, you wouldn't notice it as much. And we can also add in some blending between the frames. So we have our Flipbook setting checked here, 2 frames, 2 frames, 2 columns, 2 rows, 4 frames, 5 is the speed. And now here I can also blend the frame. So it's going to do a little bit more of tweening, blending between those frames, which helps to, oops, that's a lot. The blend mode helps to kind of change some of the transition. If you only have 4 frames, it can be a little bit noticeable, so you might want to just add in some blend mode to the Flipbook. So I can do that with anything. I can duplicate this and do a Flipbook of something else. So I have a Flipbook book example. So here's a sprite of a Flipbook of a book that is opening and closing and flying around. And I just got this online as an example. I could have created my own here also, but I just bring this in here. And now change the, so I would want to change this particle Flipbook that I just made. But if I do that, I'm going to change the drops one. So before I change that, what I'm going to do is duplicate this particle Flipbook. So I'm going to rename this to particle drops. And then I'm going to duplicate this material and rename it to particle book. And now I can add this in here and change the texture. And it's going to give me a Flipbook with the book texture. But where did it go? Let's see. Oh, I know. It's because there's a couple other settings that I have to change for it to show up. Like put it back to the normal and oh, 1 second. Okay, so I've been editing the particle book. I need to, at the top here, take the particle book material and add it here. And then when I go to edit particle book, I need to go down to the alpha and put it back to 1. And so now you can see this Flipbook particle system, which is a book opening and closing and flying around. So the alpha had to be put back to 100 so that it wasn't fully transparent. So that is something to note. If something doesn't show up when you bring in a PNG, make sure you look at the alpha if it's between 0 and 1, and then up here, whether or not there is a blend mode that is going to be, let it show up. So I could change this so that wouldn't be a very good blend mode to use. So I'll go back to normal. So now we have this animated book particle system that is flying around with bubbles. And I don't know, I didn't really think about the concept of this. I'm just showing you how it works. But I could create this as a multi-level particle system that goes together. And we'll look at the next example of that. So if you go to the particle examples folder again and go to public and go to particle materials and then go to, I think it's under world. Yeah, I think it's the fountain. Okay, so let's get the fountain. So go to particle materials and then go to world and then go to fountain. And then let's get the fountain water droplets and drag that in here. Okay, so now we have the fountain water droplets, and we need to add in a new particle. So I'm going to add in particles. I don't want that part of that. And I'll rename it water. And then I'm going to take this fountain water droplets and add it in here. Okay, so that's just the droplets. I'm going to turn off these other. So there's the water droplets. If we go back to the particle materials, back to world and fountain. So we have fountain, distortion, and splash. Let's also bring in those two other ones. So bring in distortion and bring in splash. And now go up to objects and create an empty object. And this we're going to call water particles. And let's put the water in here. And let's rename it to drops. And that's what we have here is the water drops. Let's see where this is located. I'm going to pull this up. Okay, so let's make this under the water particles empty object. Put the Y position to 2. Okay, so I have water drops and I have my water drops here. And now I'm going to duplicate the water drops and I'm going to rename it to distortion, and then I'm going to drag in the fountain distortion here. And then I'm going to duplicate this and rename it to water splash. And then I'm going to take this one and drag it into the water splash. And now I will go up to my parent object, water particles, and move up the whole thing. So in this empty object, I put 3 different particles to create this entire particle object. I think it's a bit easier to see without someone's face there. And we can look at it individually. And this is how they have it in the example too. So this might be something like the base of a fountain, or it could just be a weird filter that you use in any way. But you can combine different particles that would all go together in its own object that you put into an empty object and put them together. And the reason is because I can't do the water drops flying up in the way that they are with their own texture, and also have this water image simultaneously flowing down with its texture the way it works. So I need to create 2 separate particle systems, but put them together. One is for the splashing drops that are coming off. One is for the splash, and one is for the distortion. So we can look at them individually. We already saw the drop. So if we just look at the distortion, it's this sort of, you know, refraction kind of effect on the image behind it. And if we look at the water splash, it's a series of water splash images that look like the edge of, you know, water that is flying out of a fountain. So when we combine these 3 effects, we create a particle system that is for water splashing overall. So you can combine particle systems to create a lot of creative things that are all doing different things. And there's no, they can include anything. So I could create an empty object and rename it to book bubbles and put the drops and the books into that object. And now I can move those around. Oops, I have to grab the parent object. Now I can move those around together and do different things with those. And also uncheck it so that I don't see all of those. So let's look at how that water effect is doing. This splash. It's the same thing as the book and as the water droplet. It is using a Flipbook and images that they have here, which are just texture images. We can look at it with a transparent background. So they're taking this, 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 and this, and playing it in succession, just like we did with the bubble image. And this is where Photoshop really comes into being a very useful tool for creating this. This looks like, oh my gosh, they animated water and they have this amazing effect, but actually it's 4 still images with a transparency in it that is playing as a GIF image basically over and over again. So that's really useful to know in terms of creating your own particle systems. You can do so many different things. You can start off with their templates and play around with it and edit, bring in your own PNG images, create your own sprite sheets in Photoshop, create your own sprite sheets from your GIF images, and add in a lot of different effects to create entire particle systems. The one last thing in this tutorial that we're going to look at is making a prefab. So I have this particle of smoke system, and let's say I want to create a set of objects that I know that I'm going to reuse. I can take, sorry, one second, just something's distracting me, 1 second. Okay, so I can create a series of objects that I can repeat and then edit at the same time. And that is called the prefab. So that's going to be really useful if you're doing a certain type of project that has maybe some complex objects involved. So let's do an example. I'll give you a simple prefab example. Let's go up to the objects and go to mesh and add a sphere. So now we have this sphere object that is automatically added to our scene. And again, this is how you move these things are up here, or you can click on the WER key and then right click to move around in the space. So this happened to line up really good with my sphere. I want my particles and my sphere to be a part of the same object though. So I'm going to pull this sphere out over here and create a new empty object and rename it to smoking sphere. And I'm going to take my sphere and drag it in there. I'm going to take my particles and drag it into there. So now I have both of these objects in my smoking sphere parent object. And I want to move my particle system to be inside of this sphere. And I am going to change the size of this sphere a little bit. Oops. Oh, it's not letting me drag it all at once. It should let me drag this middle square to the right and scale it up. Oh, I see. Is that a weird angle? Okay, so there, I'm just dragging it up. And I'm just trying to center this smoke a little bit in a little bit of a different spot. So it's just kind of coming through this a little bit. And I probably changed the transparency on this, the edges of the smoke a little bit for my purposes. But okay, so I have this smoking sphere object, and I don't know, maybe my filter concept is to have these spherical things that are on fire and that are floating around, and they're going to block the view of somebody. So I can now take this object as a whole and scale it up. And it will scale the particles and it will scale my whole sphere. And maybe, let's see, I'll go back to the world view. And here's my camera from behind here. So I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to populate this space with little smoking spheres that are at different distances from the camera. If you grab this inside here and move it, it will grab the whole, it will grab the sphere, not the whole object. Okay, so I'm playing with the position. But so now I want to be able to duplicate this and use it in a few different ways later. So what I'm going to do is right click on this and go to Save as Prefab. So now I have this prefab object that is always going to have the same settings, and I can just drag this in and pull it up here and pull this over, and now I can scale this one down and pull it up. I'll put that over there, and then I can grab this prefab and bring it over here. And I can rotate this now. So maybe I want to rotate this. Let me use this. Maybe the smoke on this one is going this way. And this is useful as a prefab object because I can take this particles. So I have my particle smoke, which is applied to all of them. And whatever I change on this will change on these. I can add in more objects in here. So I could add in an additional sphere to my prefab. And when I change the spheres, I could change them all at the same time. So that can be a useful thing depending on what you're building. And we'll get into it more in a couple of weeks when we look more at working with 3D objects. So play around with some of the particles, with the Sprite Sheets and the things that come along with the template, and try out some of the things yourself. And then when you're finished with the tutorial, just take a quick 5-second screen capture video of your screen here and turn that in with your last name and your first name. And yeah, let's do some like more particles and then turn it in as your assignment this week. Okay, good luck, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye.